Hi, this is Ann V. Brady, and I will be reading from A New Beginning, the story of my adoption, life, and service, illustrated by Eric C. Brady. I asked Ed how old he was. He told me 24. Ed told me that he thought he was falling in love with me, and I told him I felt the same way. We decided to see where it would go. 2 weeks later, my ex boyfriend that dumped me wrote saying that he would be coming to Fort Gordon to visit me. He was planning to come around June 6th. On June 6th, Ed told me he loved me and asked me to marry him, and I said yes. I packed some clothes and we rode to Columbia, South Carolina on his motorcycle. Before we left, he asked, "What if your ex comes by the barracks?" I said that I doubted he would actually show up, but if he does, who cares? I left a note on the outside of the door for my ex telling him where I had gone, and then we left. He had lied too many times that I didn't care. Ed and I rode up to Columbia, South Carolina on his motorcycle, which was a Yamaha 450. Ed and I stayed in a hotel in Columbia, South Carolina. That's where Ed told me that he had lied to me. Ed told me that he was only 20 years old, not 24 years old. I asked him why he lied. Ed said, "Would you have gone out with me if I had told you I was 20?" I told him no. Ed said, "That's why I lied to you. Do you still want to marry me?" I said, "Yes." The following morning, we went to the mall in Columbia. We went to the Five and Dime. Ed bought me a ring and a matching band. Ed told me that when we had more money, he would buy me a real ring. We then stopped a mall security guard. Ed asked him where the justice of the peace was so we could get married. The security guard informed us that no justice of the peace was open because it was Saturday. He did tell us about south of the border, South Carolina. Security guard told us that the justice of the peace in south of the border performed same-day weddings on weekends. Ed and I signed out of the hotel and drove 104 miles to south of the border, South Carolina, to get married. We filled out the paperwork and waited our turn. When we were before the Justice of the Peace, he asked Ed for his birth certificate. Justice of the Peace told us that because Ed was under 21, he had to have a birth certificate to get married. Ed told him he didn't have his birth certificate, but his Georgia driver's license had his birthday on it. The Justice of the Peace told us that wasn't good enough. We left and drove 184 miles straight back to Fort Gordon, Georgia. When we got back to Georgia, Ed told me that he would drive to Pensacola, Florida on Monday to get his birth certificate so we could get married. He copied down the phone number of the payphone in the day room of the barracks. He told me he would call me every night at 7:30. Coworkers kept pushing me to fill out forms because they thought we had married. I kept telling them I would. I didn't want to tell them we hadn't. Ed called me from Florida and let me know that he had gotten his birth certificate. He also said he was going to try and earn some money on an oil rig. That Saturday, I was waiting to hear from Ed at 7:30. I ended up waiting until 9:30 and I was ticked off. I felt he had betrayed me. Just as I was about to give up, in walked Ed. He looked horrible. His neck and wrists were all swollen. He told me that he had missed the helicopter to the oil rig and decided to come back. He joined a group of bikers traveling the same direction. While they were riding, they traveled through a swarm of bees. Fortunately for him, he had his helmet with visor and windjammer on his motorcycle. He was bitten on his ankles, wrists, and neck. Other riders weren't so lucky as they crashed their bikes. One rider was allergic to bees and had to give himself an EpiPen shot. I told Ed that we had Monday off, so we decided that we would go to get married on Monday. Monday, we drove to the Justice of the Peace in Aiken, South Carolina. After we filled out the paperwork to get married, Ed handed his birth certificate to the Justice of the Peace to prove he was 20 years old. We were told that we would have to come back tomorrow as there was a 24-hour waiting period. Ed was told because of the waiting period, he didn't need the birth certificate. The next day at work, I asked Captain H if I could have a 2-hour leave at 3, and he said okay. Ed and I drove to Aiken, South Carolina, and were finally married. We found a motel, the Heart of Aiken Motel, nearby, and rented a room by the week. We drove back to the barracks and collected my uniforms and all other possessions and moved into the motel room. Ed drove me back and forth from the motel and work. I started the paperwork to move out of the barracks and added Ed as my dependent. During this time, I would call and talk to my mom and let her know I was okay. I never told her that I was married. Ed asked me once why I didn't tell her. I told him, you wouldn't understand. I explained that she would go ballistic and be down to Georgia in a flash to get our marriage annulled. I know Ed thought I was exaggerating. Little did he know. The biggest obstacle I had was when I went to change my medical records. The clerk asked me for Ed's social security number. I told her she didn't need it, and she kept insisting on it. I finally told her that he was a civilian. She said, oh, you can keep your social security number back then. While I was working and filling out paperwork, Ed was looking for a place to live. He finally found a trailer park in Grovetown. The trailer park was a military trailer park because the owners of the trailer park only rented to military and their families. The trailer was $90 a month, which we could afford. It was a small trailer. It had 2 bedrooms. One bedroom had a single bed, and the other bedroom had a cot. Ed and I were skinny enough that we both shared the single bed. We used Ed's motorcycle to do grocery shopping and to do the laundry and to the laundromat. I would sit behind Ed on the motorcycle with bags of groceries or laundry between us while I held on to Ed. There are 2 pictures below. Both of them are color. One is Ed with sunglasses on, and it says Ed married 1980. And the other one says Ed's motorcycle, and was our Yamaha 450. It was taken at the dusk. It's a black motorcycle standing next to a trailer. In July, I took 2 weeks leave, and Ed and I flew up to New York so Ed could meet my family. I also wanted to get my car so that we had 2 modes of transportation. Before, when I tried to get my car, the car would usually stop working on the day I was going to drive back to Walter Reed. It was an uneventful flight. When Ed and I landed, my dad was there to pick us up. I told Ed, I have to go to the bathroom. You tell my father we're married. I did have to go, but I was also afraid of my dad's reaction. When I came out of the bathroom, my dad said, so, Ronnie, I hear you have something to tell me. I stopped dead in my tracks and stared speechless at my dad. My dad said, we already know. I will wait and see before I decide about your marriage. Don't worry about it. We figured you were married, but when we got home, don't say anything. Let me handle it. My mom and my brothers were very upset, and everyone asked if I had to get married. I assured everyone that I wasn't pregnant and that Ed and I loved each other very much. My family took us out to see South Pacific at the Jones Beach Amphitheater. Ed and I followed my family to Jones Beach in my car. I noticed that the gas tank was at a quarter of a tank. I informed Ed that we should stop and get gas so we wouldn't run out of gas. I explained that at a quarter of a tank, the car was on empty. Ed assured me that we had plenty of gas and would be fine. We made it to Jones Beach and enjoyed the show. On the way back home, we ran out of gas. Fortunately, my brothers stopped to help us and got us enough gas to drive it to a gas station and fill up. Ed realized that I knew what I was talking about. On Wednesday, my parents had brought us had bought us tickets to a Broadway show. They're playing our song with Robert Klein and Lucy Arnaz. We rode the train and subway into New York City. We walked from the subway station to Broadway. There were drunks sleeping on some of the doorways, and before we got to actual Broadway, we passed by peep shows and triple X rated movies. The crowds were so huge, it gave me claustrophobia. Ed stopped at a pawn shop for a folding knife for protection if he needed it. We wore leather cowboy hats and were holding hands as we walked towards Broadway. One of the managers of the peep show asked Ed if he wanted to go inside to the peep show. Ed told him, "No, I'm not interested." The man grabbed Ed's arm and tried to drag him inside the building. Ed pulled the knife he had just bought, unfolded, and said, "I told you, I'm not interested." The man jumped back as he let go of Ed's arm. He ran back inside the building. When we got to the ticket booth, we asked for the tickets that my parents had paid for. We had no problem getting the tickets. The play was great. It was funny and sometimes serious. We had a great time. After the play, we went to St. Patrick's Cathedral and the Empire State Building. Hold on. We took the elevator up. On the top floor, you could see the whole city. We even saw fire trucks ride by as they answered a fire call. We found a restaurant to have dinner and then took the subway and train back home. We had a great time. Later that week, I took Ed to the Dublin pub. I wanted him to hear the band, the Boston Burglars. I was disappointed when I found out that the band was on tour. we we heard another band. Ed and I sat at the bar most of the night. While we were sitting there, a man came in dressed as if he had just come from a wedding, which he had. He sat down and introduced himself and then hit on me. I told him I was married and introduced him to Ed. He bought us drinks and talked to me a while. We eventually got up and went to play pinball. I found out from the bartender that the Boston Burglars had bought the Dublin pub. I bought one of their albums and I still have it. That weekend, we followed my parents out to the house in Hampton Bays. Took Ed down to the bay to dig up clams. Uncle Richie and Aunt Roberta were visiting our house too. Uncle Richie told me that he liked Ed, but he told me, "I don't think your mom and your brothers would like anyone you married." I told Uncle Richie he was right. Uncle Warren and Aunt Scotty were visiting us from Massachusetts. My mom told me she wanted to give me a bridal shower, but she didn't want to invite Uncle Warren. She said that Uncle Warren told the same stories over and over again when he was drunk. I told her that I didn't want a shower if she wasn't going to invite Uncle Warren. I was upset that she would think of not inviting him to a shower for me and Ed when he is her brother and visiting us. So my mom decided not to give me a shower. Ed and I decided to go fishing. We ended up fishing in a rubber raft attached by a line to the underwater radiator. The reason for this is the boat that we had was swept away in a hurricane and ended up on another shore with a tree trunk through the boat's hull. I caught a fish, but Ed informed me that it didn't count because I hooked the fish's fin. I told Ed that it didn't matter how you caught a fish as long as you caught it. Later that night, we had a barbecue, and Ed put the clams we had caught on the grill to steam them. They were delicious. A lot of my aunts and cousins gave Ed and I monetary gifts or checks. My mom and my brother seemed determined to give Ed a hard time. And that is all for tonight. And thank you for listening to me read my story. Hope everybody has a great day, and bye.